Well, hello, everyone. I'm here with an individual and a friend and colleague that has probably done more for veterans in our community than just about anyone I know for a number of years. And that's Jim Lorraine, who runs AWP, America's Warrior Partnership. And Jim, thank you for being with me today. I wanted to introduce you to our audience and also just talk to you about what's going on in our tribe of veterans across the nation and some of the things that they're facing and introduce you to them and just have you talk a little bit about yourself, about AWP and things that we can work together on. So if that's okay with you, I'd like to first ask you to just kind of share with the audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, for having us on, and I appreciate all the work that Mission Roll Call does and being a good partner. So for me, grew up in Central New York, went to nursing school at Syracuse University. My goal was not to be a nurse; it was to be a pilot. And I realized when I went to the recruitment station that I was colorblind, so I couldn't be a pilot. But I was a nurse, and they said, "Hey, you can be a flight nurse in the Air Force. Well, you won't fly a plane; you'll sit in the back, and or you'll work in the back." And so I joined the Air Force. Served 23 years. I had the last, I did a little bit of time in a hospital when I started, and then I assessed into aeromedical evacuation. Served in Europe for 3 years, did Desert Shield Storm, and did some hostage releases out of the Middle East. We would bring them back to Wiesbaden for their next stop. And then during that tour, did a unique mission that was flew into Pakistan and moved the Mujahideen out of occupied Afghanistan. That was occupied by the Soviets in the late. It was part of the Charlie Wilson's War. It was the humanitarian side of it.
Sure.
Learned a ton and had a great experience there. Then left and went back to another flight duty at Pope Air Force Base right next to Fort Bragg. Did Haiti, back to the desert 3 times. We used to say Christmas wouldn't be Christmas without a war back then, when Saddam Hussein would always invade over holidays. But anyways, the what happened was I ended up in Mogadishu, built a relationship with the special operations, and then when I came home, I got reassigned, attached to JSOC to do medical planning, really a long range aeromedical evacuation, and then I worked at Air Mobility Command. I did airlift, and then ended up going and being a fellow to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, with the intent to go back to SOCOM.
Right.
To pull as much medical money out of the Department of Defense into SOCOM as we could. And that was supposed to be like okay, get yourself together tour. And I remember General Schumacher, who was the commander of SOCOM at the time, said, "Hey guys, this is the time to sort of spend time with your family, etc." And that was in August of 2000, and then in September of 2001, everything flipped. And then when 9/11 happened, I was in the operations center at SOCOM. And I remember now the late General Bargewell looking at everybody saying, when the second plane hit the tower, saying, "Okay, guys, let's get to work." And from there, it was SOC sent, multiple tours to Iraq and Afghanistan, retired in 2005. Mm-hmm. At the time, the aeromedical evacuation, the medical system was working really pretty well, too well, to the point where guys were getting wounded and they were making phone calls to their families from Ramstein before their families even knew that they had been wounded. And
That's
it was
amazing.
just driving morale down within the community.
Think about the logistics and making that all happen. It beats a phone call.
Yeah, it was really, guys would come off the plane and they would literally hand them a cell phone and say, "Here, call your family." And they would call their family and say, "Hey, just to let you know, I'm okay." And there's a link to that story that happens later. But the point is that the command was getting frustrated SOCOM was losing control of our valuable assets because they were going over to the services, and the services were just discharging them. And we were losing so much intellectual capacity that what we did was we said, okay, we're going to take control. We founded a program called the U.S. SOCOM Care Coalition under General Doug Brown. It still operates today. It's very successful. But the goal of that was to get to know all their veterans, build a relationship with them, and then connect them to resources that improve their quality of life, and then follow them and support them for the rest of their life. His theory was, his philosophy was, if somebody can volunteer as many times as the special operations people do, right, why is it not on us to take care of them for the rest of their life? And what happened was our recruitment and retention went up to the point about the retention. There were guys who were getting out spinal cord injuries that the military was just discharging. And I would have a Green Beret Master Sergeant who was a spinal cord injury, didn't want to get out, wanted to stay in the fight, and wanted to leave on his own terms, not on the terms of the military.
Right.
And so we found jobs for him. There was that one Master Sergeant went out to a location in the West and sat next to guys who were flying drones and working with the ISR, and they were communicating with the ground, air to ground, amazing, with the drones, but they could communicate because they were their same teams. But he was in a wheelchair.
Right.
And
he knew what they were going through, though.
Yeah, at the end, we had 19, like SOCOM we had 19 amputees in Afghanistan and Iraq when I left in 2011. 19. Amputations weren't even a barrier to service. And I think, so that philosophy sort of drove what we did. When I left SOCOM, I came to my wife, who's a retired Air Force colonel, medically retired. She had to come home. Her family lives in Aiken, South Carolina, so we had to come home to near Augusta. Right. And came with her, and anyways, the story. What happened was I took over a local nonprofit in Augusta. It grew, and then we grew it to be a national program, America's Warrior Partnership. But the same philosophy that I used at SOCOM is the same philosophy we use today, which is get to know all the veterans, connect them with resources that they didn't know existed, government and non-government, and then advocate and stay with them for the rest of their life. And those are the three things that we really focus on doing it as America's Warrior Partnership.
Right. Well, that
was a little bit long, Jim.
No, it's exactly what I wanted to hear. I wanted our audience to hear that. It's a remarkable career that's affected. You think about all the servicemen and women that you've had a positive impact on, but it's not just them, right? It's their families, it's their spouses, it's their dependents. So it's that number just multiplies, many-fold on the positive impact. And so talk me through, I know a lot about AWP, but for someone who's just watching this podcast, tell them about what you're doing and how they can be helpful. And then we'll talk a little bit more about some other challenges nationally, but sure, maybe just concentrate a little bit on AWP as you're leading that organization. Great folks at AWP, by the way. We've worked with them here at Mission Roll Call. All of them have a servant heart. All of them are invested in all of us because they are us, and they always have a connection. So maybe build on that, if you won't mind, Jim.
Yeah. So America's Warrior Partnership is founded on the belief that every veteran in the United States should be known. Right now, the VA serves about 16 to 17.5 million, 16.5 to 17.5 million veterans. The VA serves 9 million. The number that the VA serves is decreasing. Both of them are decreasing as the Vietnam era goes the direction that the Korean War and the World War II era went.
Right.
But the point is that there's so many veterans out there who I always say, if I only knew you 6 months ago, things wouldn't be the way they are today.
Right. So you're saying, and those numbers match what we're talking about, is that 50% of veterans aren't served by the VA.
Yeah, they're not touched by the VA. They're not touched by VSOs either. What you
Right.
think?
So there's the completely separated from what a good part of their life was all about, right? At least their identity. So,
Yeah.
um,
Well, I think Jim, they found a new identity, which is not a bad thing.
right,
I think it's good. You know, when you transition from one phase of your life to another, you move on with that. That's one of the reasons. You know, my team says, why is it that you never put Lieutenant Colonel at the end of your name? And I said, because I'm not in the military anymore.
right,
Yeah, I'm retired, but I move on. The only time I do use it is when I go to testify before Congress, because I want them to say, Colonel Lorraine, what do you think about this? Rather than um, at Congress is the only place that I use it, and it's not about the rank thing. It's about I transitioned. I'm a civilian. I'm a civilian who advocates for military because I have an affinity to the military, and to the point of I was a caregiver for a number of years for my wife when she was medically retired. The other story about the guys calling home and saying, "Hey, just to let you know, I'm okay." In 2019, I was holding our annual symposium, which was in Atlanta that year, and my phone kept blowing up with an unknown phone number, and I finally answered it to just tell him to stop.
right.
And when I answered it, it was my son who was in Afghanistan, who said, "Hey, just to let you know, Dad, I'm okay." And I went, "What do you mean?" And he had just been wounded. He was being treated, ironically, by a group of special operations medics that I had worked with in the past, and I knew the senior guy there. And I said, "Put so and so on the phone," and he hands it to him, and he goes, "Yep, he's okay. He's going to be fine." And we talked about the thing, but the point was is that I had been through that. I never thought I would ever have to be through that. The fact that my son was wounded in an area that I had served in and has deployed to places that I was in it's two generations who are fighting this war. And so to get to your point about the 17 million, when people talk about post 9/11 veterans, I'm at the upper side of it. I think at 62, right. I'm at the upper side, and I think, but it bridges from 18 to 60, 70-year-old service members.
Right.
That's a huge swath of people in the United States that most of them aren't even aware of what they're eligible for.
Right.
Anyway.
Well, yeah, and you and I have talked about this before. We learn about a new VSO just about every day.
Yeah.
I mean, so you have 40,000 plus or minus whatever VSOs across the country, and all of them are doing great work. Some of them are very small, geographically located, and some of them are large organizations like yourself that are touching people across the spectrum and nationally. But it does automatically make you think, well, how bad is it out there that we need so many VSOs that are addressing this issue? And even to your point, we're only touching half.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, I think veterans are entrepreneurs, and starting a nonprofit, which is the most messed up business model ever created. A nonprofit is the most messed up business model, but it's an entrepreneurial opportunity. So somebody wants to be an entrepreneur. They don't want to necessarily have a business. They're interested in going out and hunting, or they're going out and fishing, or they're doing something. Right. They stand up a nonprofit to do it. And the problem is what's happened is it's so complicated. It is so navigating the veterans world, the veteran space is a very complex process. And to your point of there are good and there aren't so good. There are those who aren't so good.
Right.
But where AWP steps in is to say, this is who we know. This is the track record that they have. We know that they're going to provide a service. And then we work with and serve thousands of veterans every year. The point about serving those veterans is to get them connected to best in class so that they're not messing around. What kills me about a lot of the nonprofits that you deal with is if they do wrong by a veteran once, the vet will never go back. They'll have a sour taste for every VSO in the space.
Yeah, yeah,
And
that's a good point.
and so it's on all of us to do what's right and to not mess around with,
Right.
if you say you're going to do it, do it. And then,
Yeah. So when you think about, and I'm glad your dog's barking because mine will hear that and bark quickly too.
thank you.
So no worries about that. Um, Talk to me a little bit about Jim. And you touched on it briefly when we first started talking about, the upstream approach that you have of getting to veterans early in the process. Talk to me a little bit about that, why that's important to anyone who's watching this podcast or knows somebody that needs to know about AWP.
Yeah. So we have 3 lines of effort, Jim, and sorry, you had asked me that before and I didn't answer your question.
That's okay.
Feel like I'm in a debate. So there's 3 lines of effort. We have our community effort, and our communities are the state of Alaska, the Permian Basin of Texas, the Navajo Nation of Arizona, the Panhandle of Florida, and Indianapolis, Indiana. Those communities, their focus is go find all the vets, build a relationship with them, educate them about opportunities, and then advocate on their behalf if there's a barrier to their success. But it's really community based, and that's how we really got started, Jim. And then what I noticed was that communities knew who all the veterans were to serve. They knew who to serve, but they didn't have the resources. And then there were national programs that had all the resources, but they didn't know who to serve. And so when you were working in a community, there'd be a nonprofit that would land in for one day, and they'd have this big event, pots and pans, hats and horns, and everybody'd get all energized, and then they'd leave. And all the vets would go, what do I do now? Who do I go to? And so what we did was we created the network, and the network is really a bridge between local communities or a community program, and we consider a community a company. So we're the veteran serving nonprofit for Wells Fargo. So Wells Fargo military connected employees come to AWP. We have about 4 per week come to us for either volunteer or assistance. So companies, communities, counties and cities come to us, states come to us, and then other national organizations. So we partner with Student Veterans of America. We partner with Hiring Our Heroes, so that when they have, like, Student Veterans of America does a great job of education and advising and mentoring through the education process. But when it comes to, I have a barrier, I can't get to school because my car had a transmission went out, that veteran comes to us. So those are considered the communities that we bring together. And then the national service providers are government and non-government. They have a lot of resources. They just don't know where to target it. And so what we do is we say, hey, listen, I've got this veteran. Here's what's happening with them. You do X. I need X, Y, and Z. You do X. Will you provide X? You do Y. You do Z. So that's the network. We work with Mission Roll Call, as you know. I love it that you're just not, it's, I see us as hopefully as your service arm. So if somebody who's taking your poll or is a member and says, hey, you know what, I could really use some help, we do that. And then the third level, which is really a strategic level, is the suicide study that we have that's really focused on veterans, identifying the veteran before they consider even taking their life. And so what I mean by that is the way the study is structured, and the intent is to move from fishing, from cast fishing or a net fishing for veterans, which tends to be the case today, is that we cast this broad net and hope that we bring somebody in, to hunting for veterans who are going to take their life. And what I mean by that is what community, and we'll release a report probably about mid-October around Massachusetts, which will be our first state. But it'll say, in these are your hot spots, Massachusetts. These are where the veterans who are taking their life are living. And in those communities, this is what their profile looks like. your best opportunity to do outreach and engagement to reduce the suicide rate is to engage those folks. And so those are the three. And so the intent of Operation Deep Dive is to inform our practice at the network level and to inform our practice at the community level, but also to position communities to do the work. You talked about upstream approach. Since October of 23, we've screened over 4,000 veterans who were at high risk. Of those 4,000 veterans, 15% of them had suicidal ideations within the last month. They either had tried to take their life or had thoughts of taking their life.
They're at the end of the line at that point.
They were at the end of the line. And so what we do is in that screening, so that's over 300 veterans, what we do is then we talk to them, figure out what's going on in their life, what's the stressor, how do we connect it, how do we connect them to resources that improve their quality of life and they get beyond it. But more importantly, we stay connected with them. So to the best of our knowledge right now, as we stay in touch with them, no one's taken their life that we know of, which I think is a huge success. But the interesting thing, Jim, is that 94% of the people that came to us who screened positive were not looking for mental health or behavioral health. They had other issues, the economy, their finances were in the dumps. They were trying to figure their way out, and they just didn't see a future for themselves. Right. And so what we do is we connect them to the resources to take care of the immediate need, look to what the midterm solution might be, and then how does it fit to a long-term solution?
Yeah, so much to unpack there. And thank you for outlining all that. And you've talked, and I've talked to a number of different organizations, right, on the biggest issue that faces veterans. So I think we would agree is the rate of suicide is still anything over 0 is too high, right? But yeah. I mean, you identified early on that the number was actually higher than the VA was reporting. Can you talk a little bit about that and where you think we are now on this road to reduce and eventually eliminate suicide? And then I have a couple other questions as well, but could you just address that?
Yeah, sure. So the way Operation Deep Dive works is that the states share with us everybody who died in their state for the last 10 years. And then we send, and those people are between the ages of 18 and 64 years old. We send all of their names and socials to the Department of Defense, and DoD comes back with matches. And DoD has stated we're 100% sure about our data. So I'm the states say we're sure about our data. DoD says we're sure about our data. So we have a really good, very good match. So when we get the data back, it includes active duty who die. It includes National Guard reservists currently serving. It includes former service members, veterans who served in any of those. Anybody who touched DoD, public health service to Coast Guard to the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Space Force, etc. And so when we get this data, we know it. We have a really good sight picture of what's happening. The VA's reports, when they do their suicide, they don't include Guard and Reserve in it. Even though Guard and Reserve in between drill times are considered veterans, many of them.
That makes absolutely no sense to me.
Well, that's how the number went from 22 to 17. And it's because they excluded one of the reasons is that the VA doesn't really have they don't know the identity of, other than those that are enrolled in the VA for healthcare or benefits, and they learn about a suicide, they don't know about the identity of the people. The thing about Operation Deep Dive is that we know the identity. So I know the National Guardsman who did 5 years of active duty and then did another 10 years in the National Guard.
Right.
When they may not be counted, but actually they're a vet. They should be counted.
They should be.
Because of their Anyways, what we're finding is, like in Massachusetts, in terms of they have a different question that they ask on their death certificates, and what it drives is a higher undercount. But the undercount is about is about 35% in Massachusetts. In other
Wow.
states, it's about 20 to 25%. So when
That's
you
all.
think about that, it drives it up. The other thing that is grossly undercounted, and it is females who serve in the military, and it's a bias that occurs with the at the coroner and medical examiner level. We believe that when the coroners and medical examiners fill out the form, it's subjective. They ask a family, they ask a friend, they ask a coworker. Well, if they don't ask it, they don't check it, and then that never makes it up from the coroner
Right.
to the state to the
Right.
CDC over to the VA. And so what ends up happening is females are undercounted by about a third.
A
So
third.
30%, 33% of females who die aren't considered having a military history. And to me, there's two travesties there. Number one, there's a moral travesty. They served in the military. They should be buried with military honors and recognized for their service. And
Yes, sir.
then there's how does that third change the profile of veterans' death, and especially around suicide or overdose? And it changes it because it's such a large undercount. It changes it. So we think, we came out with an estimate under our previous research partner that we thought it was more like, when you include suicide and then overdoses that aren't considered suicide but are accidents and undetermined, about 44 a day. It was high. Even the overdose rate. So that's the other thing. When we're just not looking at suicide for Operation Deep Dive. We're looking at suicide, and we're looking for overdose that's by fentanyl, heroin, methamphetamines, illicit drugs that are abused. And so when you add that in, the overdose, accident undetermined in those categories is almost equal, in terms of the rate per 100,000, equal to what the VA suicide rate per 100,000.
And the VA doesn't agree with your numbers.
Well, we count different things. It's not that I disagree with theirs.
Okay.
We count. If you raise your hand and said you just swore to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, I'm going to count you, because you're for a National Guard Reserve. And that's something I'll tell you, Jim. This is a big issue. The National Guard Reserve are not counted in the same way, or not served in the same way as if active duty. If even in the census, so we talk the census, you and I use the terms like 16 and a half, 17 and a half. That doesn't count Guard and Reserve that don't have more than 180 days of consecutive orders.
Yeah.
And you go, how is that? And
because when you're deployed as a National Guard person, even if it is for a short period of time, it's 100% you're deployed. It's not like you're partially deployed or partially in harm's way, right? It's not like, oh, well, I'm not really in that much danger. I'm National Guard. Right?
Yeah. Well, National Guard, let's use National Guard has a fighter, in the Air Force, you could be a fighter pilot. Let's say you never did 180 days consecutive tour as a National Guard fighter pilot. You're telling me that while I'm not flying at F-16, or flying that C-130, North Carolina National Guard, those C-17s, oh, you're not counted. And if they got hurt and came home, they would not be eligible for VA healthcare, and they might not be eligible for a VA disability benefit, depending on how they got hurt.
Yeah.
And so when I was at SOCOM, there was a vehicle that got hit by an IED, and in the vehicle were two National Guardsmen, a reservist, and an active duty. And they all came home, and they all got treated at Walter Reed. They all got different benefits. They all had the impact. The National Guard Reserve impact was the other that compounds it, is that they lost their civilian job.
Yeah. And
so again, we don't, as a nation, when you read the definition of a veteran, so this gets to the question you asked, the VA doesn't agree. When you read the definition of a veteran, it's very clear. You're either active duty or you served 180 consecutive days on orders, and they had to be federal orders. So National Guardsmen, you can't go to a state-directed event and count because it's not, oh, by the way, your basic training doesn't count. And all of your training doesn't count as consecutive orders.
Well,
we have to change
we
it.
could do a podcast just on that and bring in some of the leaders of the National Guard, but it just seems to me
if we're so dependent on them, Jim, we were so dependent on them, then why are we not treating them the same as active duty? If you swore to defend the Constitution, you're in. In my book, you're in. So we count that. And we do stratify it out. So yeah, the VA counts just veterans, and we count everybody who meets the criteria of the VA's definition, but we call them former service members. Yeah.
So,
and we count overdose.
Yeah, there's so many.
One last thing about the overdose thing, and it's going to make you crazy too.
Yeah.
So there are a number of states that count when they categorize a fentanyl death. They don't count it as a suicide, accident, or undetermined. They count it as a homicide. So if I only pull suicides, I never get the fentanyl deaths. It's all I'm. We've got to do things differently.
Yeah,
that's all I'm advocating.
It's mind-boggling, and so when we talk about doing things differently, and we're right now in a very debated political season, right, with the elections coming on. So I'm not going to ask you to comment on. I wouldn't do that to you politically. Just, but we do have 2 vice presidential candidates that were veterans, or that are veterans. What would be, in your mind, when they debate coming up in October? What would be the question you would want asked to both of them in front of the American people?
I would say, I would address it this way, and this goes to the suicide numbers. So we don't see suicide as America's Warrior Partnership. We don't see suicide as a program. We see it as an outcome of really good programs, which what I mean by that is you have good housing programs, you have efficient benefits delivery, you have great health care, you have great programs. Veterans' quality of life goes up, their hope goes up. So veteran suicide is so complex, it can't be a program to itself. It has to be an outcome, that measurement. And so at the last State of the Union, President Biden mentioned veterans twice, one in passing, but one, he talked specifically about the veteran suicide rate had gone down. And in my mind, I said the scorecard for the VA is veteran suicide rate. That is an aggregation, the outcome of we have a good program. So to your question, what would be the question? I would say, given that suicide numbers are an outcome of really good programs, how would you change the programs and accessibility for the VA to drive your suicide rate down? Because if I have a low suicide rate, I have a low homelessness rate. I have a low food insecurity rate. I have a low financial insecurity rate. I have a low, by the way, all those, I lump them into one thing. Everybody talks about food insecurity. It's financial insecurity.
I couldn't agree more.
The root cause of what's happening. And so how do I get to, so that would be the question, Jim. I know it's a long way to get there, which is usually me, but the point is that we have to recognize that suicide prevention is an outcome. It's not a program, it's an outcome of really good programs. And that the question to the candidates would be, how are you going to change the VA to improve the quality of life for all veterans? Not the 9 million, but for the 17 million veterans. How do you change it?
No, it's a great answer. It's a great question, and let's hope we can do it. After the presidential debate 2 nights ago, we sent out a poll. You probably saw it on our social media, and said, do you believe that, veterans issues were addressed during this debate? And we've had 100% of thousands of polling said, no, absolutely not. There wasn't one topic about that. And if you think about that in the dangerous world that we live in, and that this is And I've tried to talk about that this is a significant voting bloc, right? This is 18 million veterans multiplied by a certain number that could be 2 or 4 or even more that represents their dependents, their spouses, their family members that are caring for them, that are involved, that know the issues, that are going to vote those issues. And it's not being addressed. So,
Yeah, I
and
agree.
you talked a little bit about financial insecurity, which I think is so important because, as you know, the Department of Defense has a stat that says 24% of active duty military, so people that are on active duty right now.
Yep.
You have a son on active duty. I have 2 daughters that are on active duty. 24% of them have food insecurity issues, which in my mind means financial insecurity issues, because
Oh yeah.
the first thing you're buying is either shelter or food, right? Everything else is secondary to that. So if you can't buy enough food, clearly you don't have enough money. How do
It
you
might ever
see
be the transportation is probably the third.
it? Yeah. So when you think about that 24% of active duty right now,
Yeah.
just talk that out and how that affects what you're dealing with at AWP when they become a veteran.
Yeah. So, I don't think anyone who serves in the military, and I don't care how big their families are, that's a small percentage. But anybody on active duty shouldn't be on SNAP at all. There should be no need for that. We have enough in our budgets. That should be a priority. There's 5 soft truths in special operations, and the first soft truth is humans are more important than hardware. And it's something that we live by in special operations every single day, is that the human is more important than the hardware. And if the Department of Defense took that approach and said our humans are more important than that carrier, that F-22, that new, whatever we're going to buy, if you took that and said, hey, listen, I'm going to take care of our people.
Right.
So it should never be. How does it affect? I think service members getting ready to transition out, they think that they can make more money on the outside, and some can, and some can't. The water cooler expert in the barracks is saying, hey, I'm getting out, and this contractor is going to pay me $120,000 a year to do blah blah blah. And the reality is actually they're not. And so, but the guy hears it and he said, well, if my family's on SNAP, why am I not going to get out? And then they get out and they don't have a plan. And I think one of the things that that TAP transition assistance transition TAPS needs to be transitioned better. What we're advocating for is that when you go into TAP and you say, hey, I'm going to come home to Augusta, Georgia, that someone is handing you off to somebody in Augusta, Georgia. If somebody's going to go to Charlotte, somebody's handing you off to Veteran Bridge Home, and well ahead of the discharge. So when you get out, you know how much you're going to make, you know where you're going to work, you know where you're going to live, you know where you're going to go to school. The problem is that honestly, there's not enough focus on the individual and the human. We have a recruitment problem. I'm a firm believer that the best recruiters for the United States all volunteer force are the veterans who are out. And if we're not taking care of the veterans who are out, they're never going to recommend their kids or their nieces or their nephews go into the military.
Exactly.
We need to swing that pendulum to go, hey, the best thing for you, the narrative that I would see in 10 years would be that those who are getting out say to their friends and families and coworkers, the best thing you could ever do to get a head start in life is to serve in the military, because they're going to take care of you for the rest of your life. To go back to the SOCOM piece, get to know all the veterans, get to know everybody in SOF, build a relationship and advocate for them for life. The VA should be doing that get to know them all, build a relationship with them, and advocate for them for life. And then they're going to say, hey, you know what? The reason I'm in the position I'm in today is because I joined the military. You should.
Yeah, and I don't think the Department of Defense has appreciated what the impact is on veteran issues, how that affects recruitment issues. So what they do is just kind of throw more money at the marketing of joining versus figuring out, to your point, the value of joining the military. And I also wonder, when you went to basic training or through ROTC or whatever program it is.
In the Air Force, I went to the golf course.
So you went to the golf course. And you said that, I didn't. I think all the services do a wonderful job of taking a group of diverse people from different economic backgrounds that look different from each other, that have grown up different, and bring them into an organization, and they're inculcated in a new ethos, and they're part of a team, and they care more about the person left and right than they're thinking about themselves. It does a wonderful job and has done that for centuries. A very good job, probably the best in the world, of having you join an organization. I just wonder why they can't have that kind of boot camp kind of mentality at the back end. Why they don't, anybody who's getting out, take them away, have them focused on what they're going to do, bring in veterans, all of those sort of things, because they need to realize that their success outside of their time in service directly impacts the next generation, to your point. And the DOD and VA don't seem to see that.
I don't think it's a VA. So it's a DOD thing. One of the things we used to call it reverse boot camp, back in the late 2000s, about 2008, 2009, I worked for Admiral Mike Mullen, who was the chairman. At that time, the statistic came out that only 22% of the recruitable population was eligible to be recruited into the military. There were 78% who weren't. And so that came out, and I said, hey, boss, just to the people who are going after that 22% are the Division I schools. They're the Fortune 500 companies. They're the great programs. And then the other thing that came out just right about the same time was, I think it was Newsweek, came out with the top 100 companies to work for. And when I dug into that criteria, I said, DOD's got, a lot of them were DOD's got a lot of those things. How would we rate amongst the top 100, right? And why can't we get our name in? Why can't we get DOD in below Google or above Apple or whatever? Mm-hmm. And so we went down the road of when I dug in more, I came back and I said, hey, boss, the best recruiter that we have is the VA. And he wanted to have a joint. He always liked to go to a joint hearing where it was the Armed Services Committee and the VA committee together, because he felt like they should be working like with hand in glove. So I say that. The other thing that we talked about, and at SOCOM we had the opportunity to do it. Remember I told you we kept guys on because they transitioned out on their own. We had the authority by law to have, I think it was 110 to 120% overstrength, right? So we had a little bit of a buffer. My suggestion I'm on a Department of Labor Federal Advisory Committee, and I said, DOD needs to go back to that, get the authority to go to overstrength, and then build in a 6-month window, 90 days, 6-month window, whatever it is, where your job ends. You're still on the roll, so you still get health care, still get TRICARE, your family's taken care of, but that's a transition period, and you have to participate in it, or you're not going to get paid, right? And right. So you're absolutely right.
To be there. That's your duty station.
But if I took the money out of the recruitment dollars, out of the advertising dollars for recruitment, and popped it into there, I'd probably do a better job in the recruitment there, because I'm going to have a happy customer.
Right.
Anyway.
There's
a lot. There's a lot. Jim, there's always a lot to unpack when we talk.
I know. And I always feel that if I'm doing my job right and you're doing your job right, that we'll have these organizations, Mission Roll Call and AWP, be out of business in a few years, right? That everything's
Yeah.
solved. But it seems daunting. That task seems quite daunting.
Yeah, I don't I would love to be out of business. I don't know if I think there's always a role for a non-government. The government can only do so much, and non-government can only do so much. But if you work together, you
Right.
can cover most of the gaps you have. Now, what your mission is to unify the voice of veterans. I hope that never goes away, because the individual voice of veterans needs to be heard at the highest levels without a filter, when you think about big VSOs and they have their local regional meeting and they come up with 5 points, and then they go to their state meeting and they come up with
Right.
they wash out the 5 points and come up with 5, and then as it comes up, and then you match the platform to what they said at the bottom line, and they're
Yeah,
like,
it's not close.
they're completely like this, they're
Really apart. Yeah.
disconnected.
Yeah.
You're connected. You go.
Yeah. And there's,
So you should never be out of business.
well, and I think the other thing that we provide, to your point, is the ability to get this out quickly, because there's no filter, there's no delay.
Right.
And I think when elected officials and policymakers see how many millions of veterans that have a voice, then they pay attention to that, because that's their constituents. That's the people that are voting for them or against them, and that's the taxpayer. All of the above. So
Yeah.
I know we're running out of time here, and I know you're a busy guy. So I wanted to kind of ask a final question, and that is, you guys are doing such great work. You guys are kind of renowned among the VSO community as the expert in so many areas. But for somebody who is just listening to this podcast for the first time and says, "Oh, AWP sounds like they're doing great work," how could they get involved? How do they learn more about you, and how can they be supportive of you? What would be your call of action to them?
Yeah. Thanks, Jim. So what I would ask your viewers is, if they know somebody who needs help, send them to AWP. If we'll take care of it. They all they have to do is go to our website. Right at the top of it, it says request assistance. You click on it, and it'll go. And within that day, you're going to get a phone call from a human. It's not we use a technology platform to help manage our work, but we're a relationship based organization. So we want to talk to the vet. We want to understand what's happening in their life, and we want to get them connected to the services. Usually when somebody comes to us for one thing, it actually turns into 6 things that they
Right.
need. And then I would say that the biggest thing that they could do is if you know a veteran who needs help, whether they're a family member or a friend, or they're just struggling, just have them come to us. I have a very close friend of mine. We started serving. We were second lieutenants together, and I learned that he's got stage 4 cancer. He never enrolled with the VA, and so I'm working really hard right now to get him into the VA. It's not necessarily for himself, but for his family, to take care of his family, to make sure that he's all set to at the end of his life. But again, I'll go back to what I said. I wish I knew 6 months ago that he was in the position that he was in. It wasn't until just recently that his wife called me and said,
Wow.
"Can you help?" And the point is that don't wait. Just come to America's Warrior Partnership. We'll connect you to our suite of partners. We'll make sure that it happens, that you get solved. Jim, when we serve, last year we served 10,000 veterans. 85% of the time we solved the problem. 85%. Yeah. So the other thing is volunteerism. We'll connect you to Mission Roll Call and tell you that, hey, be part of Mission Roll Call, follow, participate. By the way, everybody who's on this call, every text I get, every poll you put out, I take. So
Thank you.
It's important to have your voice heard. The last thing I will say is we're 6 to 7% of the population. We have huge influence but we don't use it as veterans. And we need to use it through Mission Roll Call. We need to leverage our strength through Mission Roll Call to show the American people that we do have a strong and mighty voice. So thanks for doing that.
Well, thank you, Jim. And I'll just close by saying I know of no other individual that has devoted so much of their life to serving their country and serving veterans and possess the passion that you do to really help others. I mean, when I think of a servant heart, I think about you, brother, and everything that you do. And you've been a great role model for veterans. And I would urge any veteran on this call to realize we all joined the military to serve our country and to be part of something bigger than ourselves. All of us have certain talents and skills, and we need to always challenge ourselves to make sure that we're still serving our country and that we're still serving our communities and still serving our fellow veterans through volunteering, through being active, through Mission Roll Call and AWP or the VSO of your choice. Just plug in and know that your voice should be heard and that your talent is needed. And so thank you, Jim, for joining today. And thanks to all of our listeners of this podcast. Have a great day.
Thanks.